Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion, The Best Way to Make Salespeople More Successful. My name is Amir Motamani, and I'm a Community Marketing Manager at BrightTalk, and I'll be today's moderator. I'm excited to be joined today by four of my former colleagues, and before I do introduce them, I wanted to go over just a few quick notes about this presentation and the BrightTalk platform. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be available on demand. It will be accessible through the same URL that you're currently on, or you can access it through the social sharing icons. Now, if you guys have any questions at any point during today's presentation, please feel free to submit questions via Ask a Question tab, which is located at the top left of the screen. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the discussion. So, really excited to be joined by four of my former colleagues. So the five of us worked together at a ad tech company called Bizzo back in 2013. Bizzo was acquired by LinkedIn in 2014, so we all worked together at LinkedIn as well. So really excited to have the guys in the studio today. So I just want to do a quick introductions real quick. So can you guys just say your name, talk a little bit about your role and what company you're at? Let's start off with Brian.
Hey guys, Brian Mullen. Great to be speaking with everyone today. I'm currently a sales development manager for an inbound marketing team of SDRs over at LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm pumped to be getting the band back together, guys.
Thanks, Brian. Next, we have Vivek.
Hey guys, Vivek Venugopal here. I'm an account executive at LinkedIn currently. I've had sales and product specialist roles at Bizzo and LinkedIn, and now work with a couple of our enterprise clients on the West Coast at LinkedIn.
Thanks, Vivek. Next, we have Dan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Clay. I'm currently an account executive at Gartner. If you're unfamiliar with them, they produce the Magic Quadrant reports, which map different technology vendors across different categories. Really excited to be here.
Thanks, Dan. Glad to have you here, too. And last but not least, we have Matt.
Thanks, Amir. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Specifically covering the tech vertical over at LinkedIn. Really excited to be here and get everyone in the same room.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate that. So yeah, today's topic is about sales enablement, and so sales enablement has been a hot topic over the past 2 to 3 years. And when I personally think about this sales strategy, I think about the content and the specific technology that salespeople can use in order to have better conversations with their prospects and to help shorten the sales cycle. So yeah, my first question is for Matt. So Matt, what does sales enablement mean to you, and why do you think it's so important?
Yep, I think if you look at today's landscape, it's really about selling smarter, not harder. I think more responsibility is putting on salespeople to hunt and farm. So really about how are you going to structure your day. So I really think about is that what tools do I need for I can communicate with a large number of people and make a huge impact in helping solve my customers' problems. But from a really high level, it's just thinking about how to do my job smarter and how to do less of those mundane admin tasks.
Great, thanks. And Vivek, same question for you. Why do you think sales enablement is so important?
Well, I mean, when I think of sales enablement, I think of an inside sales team that is helping sales teams become more productive. And to Matt's point about using the tools that they need to really make that sales cycle as short as possible, but as effective as possible. And with inside sales specifically, I think that it's a relatively new layer within sales teams, but it's a really important layer that bridges the gap that has existed between marketing and sales. So for any company that is looking to have a greater marketing sales alignment, an inside sales team or a sales enablement team, whatever you call it, is crucial to making sure that the aims of the marketing side and the aims of the sales side are both aligned, and that everyone's kind of going for the same goal.
Great. And like a follow-up to that as well, do you think, since you work at a larger company, as we came from startups, it was a lot easier to align sales with marketing because the departments were so small. So do you have trouble with that in a large organization?
Well, it's not an exact science, right? And so there's always going to be there are always going to be challenges, and you're always kind of tweaking. I think the important thing in a large company is to understand that the goals that you start out with at the beginning of the year are not going to be the goals that you think are important in Q4. certainly even in the middle of quarters, and I think Brian Mullen can probably speak to this at some point, having running an inside sales team. But you might start out thinking that you need to generate, from a marketing perspective, that you need to generate, let's say, 500 leads. And then, in the middle of the quarter, you start to get feedback from your sales team that those aren't the leads that they need. And you're going to need to start tweaking what you're doing in terms of qualifying those leads, in terms of pushing certain leads through, and kind of putting certain leads in nurture streams and things like that. When we talk about the tools that we should be using, we'll talk a little bit more about that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it's really important to be as flexible as possible. And with larger companies, it does tend to be a little bit more challenging. I think if you have marketing leaders and sales leaders in a room together pretty frequently, which happens at LinkedIn, you're able to give that direct feedback, and you're able to kind of pivot when you need to in order to align with what sales is trying to do.
Great, thanks, Vivek. And last but not least, Dan, why do you think sales enablement is so important, and what does it mean to you?
Sure. So to me, sales enablement really is the coordinated effort by companies to allow their sales teams to be more effective at what they do best, or what they should be focusing and spending their time on, which is driving revenue and taking care of customers. And so anytime you can take certain activities that the rep is involved in that are lower value, such as handling and processing contracts, setting up meetings, putting together decks, things like that, and sort of outsource them to other teams or technology to allow them to focus on those high leverage, high value activities like negotiating, closing, managing relationships. That to me is the core value proposition that sales enablement offers. So it's really about taking your sales team as an asset and delivering a higher ROI against that asset.
I agree, Dan. I also love how sales enablement tools are automating all this tedious work. It allows sales reps to ultimately create these more systematic and personalized approaches towards connecting with their prospects at every stage of the funnel. So, with that, I want to talk a little bit more about measuring specific metrics for sales enablement. So let's start off with Vivek. So Vivek, what are the most important KPIs for sales enablement strategies?
Yeah, it goes back to a little bit about what I was talking about earlier, which is for me, as a salesperson, lead quality and data quality is by far the most important the most important thing that I look for. So when you think about marketing, generating leads, passing it over to inside sales team, them qualifying those leads and pushing it up. And we work with a lot of marketers, right? And a lot of marketers are focused on generating leads. But from a sales perspective, those leads don't mean much unless they are actually quality leads. As a salesperson, to Dan's point earlier, as a salesperson, you want to do the least work possible, and God forbid we actually make salespeople do work. So we want to make sure that the leads are those Glengarry leads, right? How can we get the most quality leads passed over? And so for me, lead quality is probably one of the most important KPIs. What that means to different organizations is going to be completely different. To some people, it might just be that a lead engaged with a couple of pieces of content. To others, it might mean that they've engaged with at least 10 pieces of content, and they have downloaded a white paper, given you their email address, the name of their firstborn child, the social security number, whatever a quality lead means to you. It's important that you define that as a marketing team and as a sales team, so that you can instruct your marketing team on what you find important, and then those are the leads that get passed over to you. And so for me, that's what I look to as kind of being the most important KPI.
Thank you, Vivek. Brian, so same question from you from a managerial perspective. So what are the most important KPIs for sales enablement that you measure your sales reps by?
Sure. I think a lot of Vivek's points actually really resonate with me because in a lot of ways, the inside sales team that I'm managing, their internal clients are ultimately account executives like Matt and like Vivek and like Dan. So we want to make sure that those leads that my team are fielding, they're working them in the most effective way and really kind of removing inefficiencies from their process. So when I think through sales enablement and kind of identifying a platform that I might be adopting for my sales reps, the first piece of it is what are the inefficiencies that I'm trying to remove from their process? What are the elements of their workflow that I'm trying to automate so that they can be more productive and get more out of those MQLs that they're working to, try and pass those over to the sales team. So with my team, it's a lot about focusing on how much time they're spending on the phone. If the purpose of adopting this particular sales enablement platform is making it so that they can work leads more efficiently, from my perspective, that really means that they're spending more time dialing, they're spending more time on calls with prospects, they're potentially getting more touches on the leads, so maybe automating some of the email communication that typically used to take up a lot of their time. And then the other piece of it too is most of the sales enablement platforms that we use have some pretty cool internal analytics, so really kind of understanding the effectiveness of those efforts. So thinking about SendBloom in particular, which is an email automation platform that my guys are using, we have the ability of tracking the response rates and finding ways in which we can increase response rates, coach our reps to be more effective, and then finally thinking about adoption of the platform. So along with those response analytics, we also have the ability of understanding how much of the team is adopting the platform and to what extent they're utilizing it as well.
Great. Thanks, Brian. And I assume, obviously, your team uses Sales Navigator for prospecting and for just account insights. So do you track like any social selling touch points as well?
Yeah, I love a good shameless plug for LinkedIn. So thanks for
there you
that for me, Amir.
Giving you a layup.
Of course, we practice what we preach here at LinkedIn, and really kind of making sure that we're adopting social selling into part of our process. So some of the ways that we're doing that is really kind of thinking about folding that social element into any touch point, regardless if that's the conversation that someone's having on the phone, emails that they're sending out that might actually have a social touch, where you went to school, your interests, the things that you've been sharing on the platform and that your organization logically cares about. And then also through InMail, which is probably the primary way that we're using the Sales Navigator product. So we are tracking those touch points and making sure that for each lead that comes through my team, we're at least sending them 1 to 2 InMails through the Sales Navigator product. And then a lot of the times what my reps will actually do is screenshot that particular InMail that they've sent to prospect and use it in another channel like email. So they can say, hey, not sure if you missed my InMail, but just wanted to make a point to get in front of you and see if now would be a good time for a conversation.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So when I think of sales enablement programs, the objective to me is pretty straightforward. I think it's about providing salespeople with the resources they need to sell more effectively. I also think that sales enablement is less about the sales process, but it should be more about the actual sales prospect. Content can play a huge role with identifying your ideal customer profile. So my next question is for Dan. So Dan, why do you think content is so crucial when it comes to the sales enablement strategy?
Well, I think content really is the driver that's going to make either the prospect lean in and be responsive to the sales rep's message, or for other types of sales folks who are working with people who are already customers, it's going to add value to that customer relationship. And so having content that is valuable for the customer or prospect and gets them to lean in and continue the discussion is going to elevate that sales rep above and beyond potentially their competitors around them. And so it's crucial then, going back to Vivek's point of how sales enablement really bridges the gap between sales and marketing, it's really crucial to have an ongoing feedback loop between those two teams to ensure that the messaging is on point and that it's delivering value. More often than you'd think, marketing teams work in somewhat of a vacuum. They might have a few informal conversations with sales, but they put together content and then push it to the sales team, and then that's kind of where it stops. But the companies that are most successful employing a content strategy have a feedback loop in place so that the content is always evolving according to what the customers are asking for and what's important to them.
Great, thanks, Dan. And same question to you, Brian. Why do you think content is crucial when it comes to a sales enablement strategy?
Yeah, I think that Dan really hit it on the head in terms of understanding the appetite for a particular client in terms of the content that they're consuming, and then being able to use that behavior to really inform a better conversation from a sales perspective. So I kind of see it from a lens in that my team is specifically tasked with fielding inbound leads that come from anyone that's downloaded a particular piece of content, and really using that as a signal from the account that there is someone, even if it's not that particular contact, that is actively, doing research and in market for our solutions. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll say, hey, this looks like an individual contributor who's been driving a lot of activity through attending our webinars, through downloading our content. Maybe we can kickstart that conversation with an individual contributor, build them into a champion for LinkedIn, and get their help to ultimately navigate through that account and find a decision maker and get the kind of conversation started that our account executive would want to move through their pipeline.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Brian. In terms of the type of content that these people are downloading, obviously shows certain intent, depending on what kind of piece of content that is. It could be top of funnel, mid funnel, or lower funnel content. So yeah, being able to align that content to where they are in the buyer's journey obviously is very important for sales reps. So my next question is for Vivek. Why is it important for sales reps to engage prospects effectively throughout the buyer's journey?
Yeah, it's hugely important. It's more important now than it ever has been to kind of use a cliched phrase, but we've all seen, for the last, 3 to 5 years, we've seen the stat that 90% of the buyer's journey is happening before they contact salespeople. And the buyers of today are much more able to arm themselves with the knowledge and the education they need to make an informed buying decision. So the buyer's journey is being dictated a lot of times by the buyer before they even get in contact with anyone on the sales team. As a seller, we need to start to think about ourselves more as trusted partners of our buyers rather than simply just vendors. And in order to do that, we need to start acting more like Sherpas on this buyer's journey. So there are a lot of different pieces of content that our buyers can consume to learn more about the ecosystem, to learn more about the space, to learn more about the different programs and products available. As a seller, our responsibility then is to point them to all these different resources, help them consume that content and data, and really help them make the best decision for what they want to do. Now, if you truly believe in the product that you're selling, you shouldn't be afraid of a buyer being educated about the space. And by the way, if you don't believe in the product that you're selling, you probably shouldn't be selling that product, right? If you're focused on helping educate your buyers become the best buyers that they can be, then it is your responsibility as a seller to be involved in the buyer's journey as early as possible, to arm your buyers with the kind of content and best practices they need to make an informed decision, so that when it is time for them to make that decision, they look at you as a trusted partner, not just in buying the product that you're selling, but also in other products in the space. When I sell to marketers, I try to make it so that any marketing technology that they're purchasing, whether related to ad products, whether related to LinkedIn or not, that they look at me as someone who knows the space well enough that they can ask me for my advice on what they want to buy. And I think that's what we should all be striving to is becoming that trusted advisor.
Thanks, Vivek. Matt, same question to you.
Just to kind of piggyback off Vivek, when I'm thinking about the buyer's journey, I'm kind of looking at it from, what's important from the sales. Yes, you want to solve their problems and partner with your customers, but, the ultimate end-all goal is to sell them the right solution at a good price. But I look at it as that you shouldn't give them too much information on the first call. I think too many reps still get really excited about their first initial call and look at, oh my gosh, I have next steps with this customer. When working with your sales leader, you should think about, what information I should give at each call, a little bit of value each time, And then also space it out. I think, as reps, too many times, I even still do it, fall in this trap. I have a really good call, and then I send a, 3-paragraph follow-up that's really detailed and gets really in the weeds, and the buyer's just not there. So as reps, I think we need to simplify our story, attack one problem at a time, because it is a long buyer's journey. And a lot of times the people we're initially first talking to are not the actual buyers. They're someone we need to champion, and we need to arm them with the right tools so then they can bring it and sell it into their boss or their team.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Matt. I also think it's very important to map out a business's pain points and problems, but on the first call, especially when you have a longer sales cycle and it's not transactional, you shouldn't dump as much information like you said and try to close them on the first call. So obviously I think that's a very good strategy. Great, thanks guys. So we've been talking a little bit about how sales enablement mostly is about leveraging technology to outsource manual activities to free up time to focus on more valuable tasks. So this next question is for Dan. What are your favorite sales enablement tools that you use on a daily basis?
Yeah, well, you're gonna have to take my responses with a grain of salt because I put this out to the highest bidder on Twitter, so I kid, of course. So the first I would say is ToutApp. The CEO over there, TK, if you're listening, you can make your check payable to Dan Clay. But if you haven't heard of ToutApp, it's kind of like I would consider a sales automation tool. So you think about marketing automation is a way for marketing teams to organize lists of customers and prospects and then coordinate communication to them. ToutApp does a bit of the same things, but is focused on salespeople and helping them manage the outreach and nurture process for their clients and customers. So lets you get a bit more personalized, offers email tracking, lets you sort of put together coordinated email campaigns, and just overall a great tool to manage your email outreach to the folks that you're reaching out to. Second and third, like DocuSign is great. It's one of those things that sort of gets out of the way, but you don't really appreciate it until you have to use the old way, right? So just having a contract, getting it in their hands and getting it signed in an instant is crucial. And then finally, Salesforce. I think my company currently doesn't use Salesforce, use another CRM, and you don't really appreciate a good CRM system until you have to work within a bad one. So, Salesforce, all you people who have your gripes about Salesforce, and sure there are bad aspects of any platform, but for what it's worth, I think Salesforce is a great CRM tool, and a lot of salespeople would be much less effective without it. So those would be my three.
Nice. And for the record, what CRM are you currently using?
I think it's like Oracle Siebel or something.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a really old build of Siebel. Yeah.
So. I didn't think you were going to answer that question, but okay.
Shots fired.
Thanks, Dan. Brian, what are some of your favorite sales enablement tools that you've either used when you were an account executive in the past, or tools that your team uses for either enablement or productivity?
Yeah, for sure. We use a ton of technology, and I actually go so far as to say is we almost have too many platforms in the mix. But from my own personal perspective as an account executive, Dan actually turned me on to ToutApp, and I quickly adopted that platform. Definitely eliminates some elements of the sales process that are just pretty rudimentary and take up a lot of useless time. It also gives you a lot of insights into the type of content, the emails, the correspondences that your accounts and your clients are consuming, which are great triggers for understanding that, is this deal really live? Is this something that is actually going to move forward? Are they actually forwarding that email that you sent after your call to a decision maker? And maybe that kind of helps you navigate that conversation. So we've looked to adopt a lot of similar technologies. We don't use ToutApp here at LinkedIn for some privacy reasons, but we were able to adopt SendBloom, which has a lot of very comparable sales automation types of aspects to it. And then we also fold in a number of very interesting types of platforms, such as Phrase Express, which is a way of kind of quickly using canned responses via email so that, if you do get a pretty common objection, a pretty common question, you already have an email teed up so that you can quickly respond to that and you don't have to spend time writing it up. And then finally, Point Drive is a platform that I've seen my reps have a lot of success with in terms of kind of building out a customized landing page based on the product that they're selling, and kind of leaving just enough information within that landing page to really whet someone's appetite without disclosing too much information, along kind of the same lines as what Vivek and Matt were talking about. The only other piece that I would say I rely on really heavily in my day-to-day management of kind of the reps that are primarily using those platforms that I talked about would be Salesforce, of course, but Tableau. So I am constantly in front of one or two Tableau dashboards. I think I have some gripes about the platform like any other. It's not perfect, but it does offer me some really interesting insights and visibility into the way that my team is working leads, the conversion rates across business lines, the time in which it's taking them to respond to leads, so that we can quickly diagnose problems and stay ahead of it and kind of do some individualized coaching with reps that may be part of the problem.
Great, thanks, Brian. And Matt, so what are some of your favorite sales enablement or sales productivity tools that you use on a day-to-day basis?
Sales enablement would be Calendly. I think there's some other version of this, but basically insertion into Gmail where I can quickly share my calendar with my customers and prospects to have them book time that's best for them on my calendar. And it just basically eliminates this back and forth. What time's good for you? What's best for you? Here are some proposed times. So they can just it's a 2-click, and it immediately goes on my calendar and inserts the dial-in and everything and sends it over to them. So I don't even have to actually send out an invite anymore. So that's actually my favorite productivity, and I'm really hoping Gmail and Outlook, I think it's basically an add-on feature. Either they buy Calendly or they create it themselves. Then my favorite productivity app, full disclosure, my brother and 2 best friends work here, but still my favorite is Expensify, which is basically an expense app where you can snap a picture of a receipt after a wonderful expensive dinner with your customers, and it uploads it to a form, and then you can text it to a number, and it puts it in your sheet that you can then integrate. It integrates with Oracle, integrates with Concur, so multiple different platforms. And it's amazing to me when I still come in the office and I see very successful reps and even leaders have a mound of paper and expense on their table, and they're spending their Friday afternoon typing in their expense from their very thirsty Thursday night with their customers. It's very amazing to me that we live in this world where people are still using print and doing that.
How much did your brother pay you for that ad space?
Not enough. And then I think the last one is, we talk about platforms, but I think we should also, as reps, figure out how we can leverage marketing and product for sales enablement. So, whether we can use their tools like Eloqua or have marketing put on events for our high-level customers. So, we've got to focus on that too.
There's actually one that I left out that I think I'm kind of surprised that none of us mentioned, because we did leverage it so heavily at Bizzo, and that's a Chrome extension called Ghostery. So what Ghostery essentially does is it takes a look at the tags on a client's website, on any website really, and it gives you a sense of what that technology stack looks like on the other side. And so from a sales perspective, it really gives you a really unique lens into where that account, where that client is really interested in building out a technology infrastructure. Gives you a sense, from our perspective when we were selling an ad tech product, it helped us understand if there were competitive technologies in play, if there was a marketing automation system that we may be able to build an API into. Gave us lots of really interesting insights that I think otherwise we would have been kind of stuck really trying to rely on the insights from the client in order to be able to have those more informed conversations.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Brian. When I was in outbound sales, I lived in Tout App every single day. So for my outbound outreach, it was definitely a huge tool that helped tether emails as well. And like Dan mentioned, you could schedule these ahead of time just to optimize open rates at certain times of the day. And then, of course, Ghostery is obviously helpful. So at BrightTalk, I think we use like Datanyze, which is also similar to Ghostery. It shows you the pixels on a website so you can see their marketing stack, if you're selling to marketers, that is, obviously. And a few tools that I like to use here at BrightTalk, even though I'm not in sales, I still kind of prospect for thought leaders and recruit people to do these like online events that we're doing today. ConnectWise is also a cool tool. It's a Google Chrome extension plugin. It helps you find like email domain names, so you can type in a company name in Gmail, and you can find a few different variations, so you're not just guessing when you're trying to find different prospects. So yeah, thanks guys. And let's see, the next question is for Brian. I know we kind of covered this earlier in the conversation, but so how do you track performance and progress of sales enablement tools? I guess you can answer that for how you did it, I guess, personally, since you kind of mentioned that you use Tableau and you utilize those dashboards to see progress. But I guess from your days as an account executive, how would you track that?
I think that, from a scale perspective and really understanding how sales enablement tools are being adopted within our team, one thing that we actually routinely do whenever we adopt a new platform and make a pretty sizable investment, not only into the technology, but the training that goes into bringing people into the fold and the time away from their desks is really making sure that the technology is being adopted. So that's kind of the first step is we'll actually, in some of the sales leadership meetings, we'll say, we'll call out some of the top performing teams in terms of who has 100% adoption. And then we'll actually be able to track, based on that adoption, who's really using it. Because it's one thing to say that someone is actively in a Tout app or SendBloom or any of the other technologies that we've referred to. But utilization is the next biggest piece of that. Everyone's going to adopt it if they've kind of been pressured by their peers or their management in order to do so. Then we like to see, what increase in potential activity, for instance, that might have. So from a Tout app or SendBloom, again, to use those examples because they are top of mind and ones that we've talked about a lot, are we seeing that we're getting a lot more touches? Are we sending a lot more email? Are we just getting a lot more effective at our job? And then ultimately, I think that as salespeople, our responsibilities is to drive revenue. So all of the metrics that we're ultimately tracking are building up into kind of really understanding whether or not this is going to impact the bottom line and whether or not the adoption of this technology is ultimately going to drive more revenue.
Thanks, Brian. So we've talked a lot about how technology and content is important in terms of sales enablement, but we haven't really talked about the skills training or sales coaching in particular. So my next question is, let's start with Vivek. How important do you think the sales training process should be?
I think it's tremendously important, right, to have an ongoing sales training process, simply because what we are doing today as salespeople is so different than what we were doing, 15, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago. There are all these new technologies these guys have talked about, which are not, I'm sure even the guys who are talking about new technologies learned some new company names as they were talking about it, because there are new technologies emerging kind of every day and evolving really quickly. And so as salespeople, it's really important for us to be able to keep up with a lot of that. It's also really important for us to be able to keep up with the buyers, with the folks that we are selling to. They are, like we talked about earlier, constantly educating themselves, engaged in the ecosystem. And so from a ecosystem perspective, it's important for salespeople to continue to educate themselves and get trained and learn. But even in terms of sales strategy and the things that a good salesperson needs to be doing, that has changed a lot. We're no longer kind of knocking door to door and selling knives to people in their homes. And so we have to kind of evolve with the times. And whether that means getting a training on, the best subject line for your emails, or the right way in which to challenge your buyer's way of thinking. So, reading books like The Challenger Sale, where salespeople have started to think about, again, being that trusted advisor and truly questioning the motivations of the buyers. Why are you trying to get to this? From an ad perspective, we talk a lot about how people are so beholden to clicks and click-through rates. And why is that important? And it turns out it's important because that was the only thing we could measure in the past, right? But that's not necessarily the best way to measure the effectiveness of a marketing campaign. Many years ago, I worked at a nonprofit, and we had this old school president of the foundation who was actually kind of an innovative thinker, but he was old school in the way that he always told us stories. And one of the stories he told was about a little girl who was watching her mom cook a ham, and the mom sliced off the two ends of the ham and put it in the oven. And the little girl said, "Why did you slice off the two ends of the ham?" And the mother said, "Well, that's because that's in the recipe book that I got from my mother." So the little girl calls her grandmother and says, "Why did you slice off the two edges of the ham?" And the grandmother says, "That's how my mother taught me how to do it." And they kind of go back and they realize that it's because her great-great-grandmother didn't have an oven big enough for the ham, and so had to cut off the two ends of the ham in order to fit in the oven, right? And so the question is, why do we do the things that we do? Is it because it truly is the right thing to do, or is it because we're simply we simply learned that way and then we just continue to propagate it? So from a sales perspective, that means we shouldn't just rely on our natural sales instincts or things that we've learned when we first started our sales career. It's constantly evolving and changing, and especially as the sales team grows, it's important to have kind of formalized processes to train the sales team.
Great, thanks, Vivek. And Dan, so same question for you. So how important is it to have an ongoing sales training process?
Yeah, and all this talk of ham is kind of making me hungry. So Vivek's last point, I think, was a great one, and kind of underscores the one that I was going to make, in that when companies are just starting out, startup companies, for instance, it's very uncommon for them to have any sort of formalized sales process, and the reason for that is they're most likely focused more on product. They have a smaller team. The types of reps that are attracted to those types of organizations are going to thrive in sort of an unstructured environment where they're able to try different things, experiment, fail, learn from those things. But as a company matures and goes from sort of early stage startup to a larger company to eventually a public company, the more mature an organization gets, the more they need to have some sense of predictability to their revenue stream. And if you have a bunch of sales reps doing things the way that they've always done them, and sort of doing things differently and going in all sorts of different directions, sort of like the Wild West, then it's going to be very difficult for a company to put together any sort of accurate, predictable forecast. And so the sales training process then creates a sort of cohesion for the sales team, a sort of framework to work around that introduces some predictability in how the reps are approaching their sales cycles. And that doesn't mean that we're sort of taking a like Pleasantville sort of approach where you're taking a world of full color and turning it black and white and making the sales process totally bland. But it's just saying that as companies grow, they need to have more formalized processes for their reps to follow, and that also helps their reps develop within the companies and develop their professional skill sets as well. So sales training on a overall basis is important for any organization, but becomes increasingly important as that organization grows.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Dan. And Matt, same question.
Yeah, I think Dan and Vivek covered most of it, but I think it's for any CEOs or sales managers on the call, it's very time intensive to do training. And actually, we just came out of one over at LinkedIn where even with all our resources there, we outsourced it to a major sales enablement and leader in the space, and it was a full day event. And so I think if you can't have the time to do consistent trainings, you should at least look at least once a year, or maybe twice a year, to bring in some outside training professionals. It can be expensive, but I think the payoff's really well. As salespeople, we're trying to manage and juggle a million things, but if you can really get us in a room and put away the phones and the laptops for a day or half a day and half a focus, we'll really focus, and we're kind of like sponges. So I think it's a challenge if you're kind of looking at your next year plan, or you're kind of looking out, what do we need to do maybe to hit those end of the year numbers. Look at some outside coaching to rally the sales team and you're not everyone's going to get everything out of it, but even if you can pick up one or two things from a training, it will definitely help the buyer's journey.
Thanks, Matt. I agree. I feel like specifically most companies only go through the training process with new sales reps during their ramp. They don't continuously have an ongoing process. I think a formal training monthly could be excessive unless you like work for a larger company. You have a lot of different product lines where there's a lot of updates and features, and there's possible integrations that you guys can have with different companies. But like maybe a quarterly ongoing sales process, specifically for account executives or more senior reps. I think that should be a strategy moving forward to focus more on the soft skills as well as the hard skills. But yeah, my next question is for you, Brian. I'm sure since you're a SDR manager, you have to heavily focus more on like a continuous coaching environment and teaching your reps new things since they're more junior. So my next question for you, Brian, is what are some of the processes or practices you have in place to help your team improve performance?
Yeah, so we kind of think about this from a couple of different angles. One is the operational piece of really looking at their workflow and trying to understand trends, set benchmarks, and really find ways for them to become more efficient in the work that they're doing. And then the other piece of it is really individualized coaching and call shadowing. So I'll start on the operational piece and some of the interesting research that we've done using some of the dashboards that I've talked about before, really kind of focusing on Tableau in particular and understanding conversion rates by different channels and how the best way is to approach, say, a hand raiser, someone that's filled a Contact Me form, as opposed to someone who is actively in market and downloading content. And so when we kind of analyze this broader set of data, we found that pretty obvious, the faster that you get back to someone that has filled out a Contact Me form, the higher the conversion rate is. We actually have even read some studies where, if you get back to someone within 5 minutes, you can see anywhere between about a 70 to 80% conversion rate off of that lead. And then, that's a very lofty goal, right? So at LinkedIn, we average about 45 minutes in terms of our ability to get back to a lead. And that's actually a pretty good place if you start to think about all the systems that lead needs to get passed through. So my first coaching is around prioritization of their workflow. Really making sure that they are prioritizing those Contact Me leads ahead of anything else that comes in. And so making sure that they, have the ability to put down what they're doing and focus on, what's likely to drive a higher conversion rate. And then on the other side of their work, really kind of thinking about better ways for them to follow up with someone who's attended an event like a webinar like this, or someone who's downloaded content. So with that realm, we've really found that it's about making sure that people are being really persistent, with being polite, of course, and not really pissing off our prospects, but making sure that, they touch every single lead that comes through that event and content channel anywhere between 7 to 11 times. And we've also found that the window in terms of when it's best to get in touch with someone so that they've had a chance to digest the content that they consumed is around 4 days after. So that's the operational piece, is really kind of analyzing the data, the bigger sets of data that we have to coach people around the insights that we've been able to glean from that data. And then the other piece that I think, really is something that I am always challenging myself to spend more time doing is individualized coaching and really making time to do call shadowing. So I block off about 2 hours of my day every day where I'm on the floor with my team and I'm listening to conversations. A lot of times I'll actually put my laptop away and make sure that I'm not checking email. That time is just super valuable, making sure that you don't lose sight of the fact that there are so many other tasks as sales managers that can take you away from what you're ultimately being tasked to do, which is coaching and developing young talent so that they can be successful AEs.
Thanks, Brian. Wanted to shift gears real quick and talk a little bit about account-based selling, which is similar to the buzzword account-based marketing. So ABS is a highly targeted sales strategy where you're focusing on specific companies and you're trying to build a book of business around those companies. So Personalization is obviously very huge. You need to do a lot of research. There's a lot of buying committees now with specific products, so you have to be able to engage with multiple people throughout a company and maybe even across different departments. So my next question is for Dan. So how can sales enablement help execute a better ABS strategy?
Yeah, so I think sales enablement helps by giving reps the right information at the right time and allowing them to extract the most value out of whatever their account book might be. And so there are a couple ways they're going to be using the information. So they're going to be either pushing it or pulling it, right? So the first, having the information pushed to them. An example of that might be, a tool like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, Google Alerts, keeping them up to date on changes that are happening within the account. So say a company raises a new round of funding, or a key decision maker leaves the organization, or a new one comes on board. The timeliness of the response to those types of events can make or break how a conversation is started and how effectively the sales cycle is run. So giving reps the ability to stay up to date and keep tabs on their account list is crucial for executing an effective ABS strategy. And then the other half of that is pull, right? And so, reps are going to want to get information about the accounts in their account book. So pulling things like, revenue numbers, who works at the company, what the activity's been with people who work at the company, with the, their company's assets, whether it be content or email opens or what have you. Tools like Tableau, Salesforce will put this information into the rep's hands. And it's important for this information to be organized in an effective manner that's easy for the reps to extract valuable insights from it. And so if you kind of put all of this unstructured data out there to the reps are going to use it in a very unstructured manner. But if you organize it in a way that that establishes a framework where they can take that information and use it towards their accounts, that's really where the reps are going to find it valuable.
Thanks, Dan. And Matt, how can sales enablement help execute a better ABS strategy?
Yeah, I think Dan touched a lot on the push strategy, and looking at it, if you're listening to the call and you work with sales ops or so, it's really figuring out about, if I have an account-based strategy and I'm getting a call with a named account, they're going to expect me to really know a lot of information about their business. So I think it's about how can we push all this data to one unified place where the rep can have access to it, and that could be in their CRM, and there's a bunch of great tools that pump data into CRM like Inside View and Radius, versus them having to put their wingsuit on and go out on the Google web and have to find all that detail before the call. They shouldn't have to spend 30 minutes before the call trying to gather the names of the people that are going to have there, where they worked. A lot of it should, if we can, try to flow it into the CRM for they have it, that information at hand.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was the last question I had for the panel. We have a few questions that were submitted from the audience, so if you guys have any other questions for the guys, feel free to submit those right now. We have a few minutes left. Let me sort through the questions. All right, here's one. So more people seem to have purchasing power, and there's more buying teams across different departments. So what's your approach to selling into larger buying teams? Who wants to take that one?
I can take that one. This is Dan. So the accounts that I work with currently are fairly large, huge organizations with tens of thousands of employees, and we have a process that all the sales reps use called value selling, and there's an equation that basically outlines what a qualified prospect looks like. And one of the components of that equation is power. And we consider power to be, you might consider it a decision maker, someone who can ultimately give the green light to whatever it is that you're talking to the customer about. And so it's really crucial to ask, right? And this is part of the qualifying process is, Okay, should we want to move forward? What would that process look like? Who else would need to be involved? And stuff like that. So identifying that power contact early on in the sales process can really give you a leg up and prevent you from potentially spinning your wheels with someone who might be just a tire kicker or someone who doesn't have the influence inside the organization to move an opportunity forward.
So, from your perspective at Gartner, how many people do you usually talk to? You're focusing on marketers, right? You're selling them access to your guys' research. So,
right.
So how many personas do you typically have to go through, or who's the person with power that you typically sell into?
Yeah, so the higher up you go in the org chart, the more power they're going to have. So ultimately, the ultimate objective is to get to the C level, right, which is often the CMO or SVP of marketing. You get there, and you're gold. A lot of times, you get to that level, they'll push you down to someone like VP or director level, according to what you're reaching out about. But I'd much rather have the CMO of a company refer me to someone else on their team and have to reach out cold. So it's always, I find it more effective to start high and then get pushed down rather than the opposite.
Thanks, Dan. You want to jump in, Vivek?
Yeah, sure. I think, especially when we're talking about buying technology, we have a lot of research around the tech buying committee, which is to say that it's rare now that one person has, all the decision-making capabilities in a company, especially larger enterprise-sized companies. There might be one person signing the check at the end of the day, but rarely is that person the sole decision maker. They're usually consulting with a lot of different people, and a lot of different people on the team have to agree on it. And when you think about kind of the hierarchy, to Dan's point, you'd much rather have the CMO refer you to someone below them because the person below them is much more likely to take your call if the CMO is referred to them. But when you think about the content that is being put in front of these people, we talked a lot about content earlier. The kind of content that resonates with the end user, the implementer, is going to be very different than the kind of content that resonates with their manager, and certainly very different than the content that resonates with the CXO at that particular company. And so, again, talking about this marketing sales alignment, it's really important that when you are doing an account-based marketing strategy or an account-based selling strategy, that you understand the kinds of content that you want to put in front of these different kinds of decision makers, because in the end, they're all going to be sitting in a room together trying to pick the right vendor or pick the right person to go with, and they're all going to bring their own kind of truth to the table. And it's important that that they understand your value proposition as it resonates with what they're focused on doing. So from a CMO level, that's about aligning sales and marketing. From a technology manager's level, that's about making sure that their workers are being as efficient as possible to something that Brian Mullen talked about earlier. From an implementer's perspective, it's about being easy to use. And so that's really important to understand as well from a buying committee perspective.
Great. Thanks, Vivek. Let's see. Another question. So how often do you guys personally go through training sessions? Matt mentioned that they had someone come externally to do a training recently. But yeah, how often do you guys have these formal trainings? And are any of them focused on the ideal customer profile? Do you guys ever focus on buyer behavior, intent, or is it mainly just product or just skills training? Who wants to take that one?
My kind of plug there. So most trainings I've had at big and small companies are also usually around sales philosophy and just kind of bringing it back to the basics. I think a lot of times we have so many calls, we forget to really figure out what the customer is trying to solve for, and we actually don't take a point of view. So we recently had a training where it was really focused on, before you get on that call with a customer, basically put some phrases together, some ideas you think about their business, what they're trying to solve for. So you're coming to the call with, here's where I think you guys are trying to solve for. Tell me if I'm right or wrong, and if I'm wrong, tell me what is actually right. And because I think a lot of times we think about these marketers, there's thousands in different vendors, or whether you're selling to any, even finance, and they hear the same questions all the time. What are your KPIs? What's your business objective? What are your metrics? And so if you can take a stab at what you think they are and ask questions more on what and how, you're going to get a much more engaged response for people that are usually taking, 2 of these 3 calls a day with all different types of vendors who are asking the same types of questions.
The sales philosophy types of trainings are great. We do have a lot of sales trainings around product, around customer profile and buyer's journey, things like that. At LinkedIn, the bigger the organization, the more resources that you have technically. And so at LinkedIn, we have a sales effectiveness team who puts together these trainings. They're usually bi-weekly trainings, and so they are they kind of go through a different cadence, right? Sometimes it's about product, sometimes it's about sales strategy, things like that. We have external people who come in and do the sales philosophy type of training. So a kind of variety of it, and it's really important, right? Because when you're training salespeople, they are very aware of the fact that they're sitting in a room getting trained when they could be out there making sales. So it's really important if you are a sales effectiveness person or if someone you're trying to organize a sales training, it's really important to make sure that training is going to bring a certain amount of value to the salesperson and help make them a better seller. So product trainings are really important because that is going to help them become a better seller. Sales philosophy trainings are really important if they come out of it thinking that they're going to become a better seller. And so that's a really big focus, needs to be a really big focus when you're putting together sales training. Is this worth the time, the opportunity cost of not being on the phones, not being at those client sites for the salesperson themselves?
Thanks, Vivek. Looks like we're running out of time, but I guess to finish off, Brian, similar question, I guess. So from your perspective, how often are you focused on training? So whether that's prospecting for your SDRs, or if that's working on their pitch, working on their content, their templates, how often do you have these training seminars with your team?
So I think, the reality is the one-on-one coaching literally is a daily type of activity. And it's also very related to kind of thinking about how to get started within a sales enablement type of approach. So if you're a newer company, I know we've been talking a lot about, these technologies that we have at more established and larger organizations. But one of the things that I focus on by shadowing is really understanding the parts of the process that we might want to automate and we might want to think about coaching and developing around. So that one-on-one interaction that you have from a sales coaching perspective is also really applicable to the general topic of sales enablement too, really trying to understand where you can eliminate inefficiencies. And then on a broader scale, we do monthly trainings for our sales development reps. A lot of times we bring in outside sources like, some of the more tenured and successful account executives, sales managers. We'll even bring in product marketing if it seems as if it's applicable to the conversation. But I do think that sales coaching is the kind of thing that you need to make time and actually block it off in your calendar to do every day.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Looks like we're out of time. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining today's call. And thanks for joining me today, guys. It was great having you guys back.
Thank you.
It's great to be here.
All right, guys, take care.
Bye-bye.